let's wait. Let her dig the hole deeper. I've got everything backed up. She wants this to go to war? Let her be the one who fires the first shot. Legally, of course. It didn't take long for Karen to do exactly that. A few days later, she delivered a certified letter to my cabin door. Inside was a 10-page manifesto titled Notice of Civil Integration, HOA Property Acquisition Phase 1. She included a form demanding my compliance signature by the end of the month. I nearly choked on my tea reading it. The sheer confidence, the fake statutes, the made-up HOA ordinance numbers. It was almost impressive. But the next page sealed the deal. Karen had submitted a copy of the letter to the sheriff's office as evidence that I was resisting unification efforts, a term that sounded more like something from a dictatorship handbook than a neighborhood association. My son called me the moment he read it. This just got serious. She's trying to fabricate a pattern of noncompliance. This isn't just Karen being annoying. This is Karen manufacturing a case. And so I decided it was time to take this up a notch. I installed a few more security cameras, all legal and clearly labeled. I contacted my lawyer and handed over the binder. I even printed out Karen's colored pencil map and had it framed for comic relief. Because if Karen wanted a legal showdown, then I was going to give her one. Only she'd never expect that every ridiculous flag she planted and every fake fine she filed was quietly becoming a documented, time-stamped trail of her own downfall. She still thought this was about a key. But it was never about the key. It was about control. And soon, she'd learn the one thing more powerful than HOA fantasy law was real, enforceable, state-backed property law, and a sheriff who just so happened to be my kid. Karen wasn't backing down. If anything, the realization that her homemade key wouldn't unlock my cabin only seemed to intensify her obsession. The failed emergency meeting had apparently been just a warm-up act. Over the next week, she escalated things with the kind of manic energy usually reserved for political campaigns or failed game show contestants trying to stay relevant. Flyers began appearing on every mailbox in the area, each one stamped with her now familiar glitter logo and the heading Urgent Community Action Required. It was printed in all caps using at least 4 different fonts. The message was clear. She was organizing a formal vote to bring my cabin into the HOA. Never mind the fact that the HOA had no legal right to do so. Karen was on a mission, and logic was just a speed bump on her ego trip. The flyers accused me of being a security risk, hoarding water from the lake, and maintaining unlicensed wilderness structures. She even included a blurry photograph of my rain barrel setup, suggesting it was part of a militia prepper compound. I couldn't help but laugh. It was a 20-gallon plastic drum with a spigot and some mosquito netting. But to Karen, it was evidence of insurrection. What made it even more surreal was that some residents actually believed her. Not because her claims made sense, but because she repeated them so loudly and so often that people stopped questioning the details. One afternoon, I found her standing with 2 other HOA board members at the edge of my property, pointing dramatically at the treeline while holding what appeared to be a clipboard full of printed-out satellite images. I walked over slowly, hands in my pockets, and greeted them with a calm afternoon. Karen turned, narrowed her eyes and said, "We're doing an environmental survey. There are invasive plants on your property spreading into the community. It's our responsibility to document threats to native landscaping." I replied, "You mean the wildflowers? The ones that grow naturally and have been here longer than the HOA has existed?" She didn't blink. "They attract undesirable bees. Allergic residents have complained." I raised an eyebrow. "No one has ever complained about the bees. You just made that up." One of the other board members, Dale, I think, shifted uncomfortably and muttered, "Actually, I like the bees. They keep the wasps away." Karen shot him a look so sharp it could have cut through steel. "We'll discuss that later," she hissed. I smiled politely and said, "Well, until you can prove those flowers are an international threat, I'm going to keep enjoying them." Karen made another mark on her clipboard like she was preparing an arrest warrant. The absurdity escalated later that week when a giant banner appeared across the HOA entrance sign. It read, "Unite the Bluff, say yes to full cabin oversight." Karen had launched a full-blown campaign. She held town hall meetings in the community clubhouse, complete with a projector, snacks, and a homemade slideshow titled "Neutralizing Off-Grid Nuisances." A neighbor sent me a video of her standing in front of a pie chart labeled Cabin Risk Factors, where my property apparently accounted for 68% of all community instability. The remaining slices were labeled raccoons and teenagers. Despite the circus, I stayed quiet. My lawyer advised me to let her dig deeper. Every time she staged another stunt or wrote a new fine, we documented it. My son dropped by occasionally, not as a deputy, but just to check in, and we'd sit on the porch drinking iced tea while watching Karen stomp through the neighborhood like a tinpot dictator. It would have been funny if it wasn't so ridiculous, but then she went too far. One morning I woke to the sound of a chainsaw. At first, I thought someone was doing yard work, until I looked outside and saw Karen supervising two men in orange vests at the edge of my property. They were cutting down part of the old wooden fence that lined the access road. I ran outside and shouted over the noise, "What do you think you're doing?" Karen didn't even flinch. She turned and said, "Clearing a path for future HOA utility access. That fence is an obstacle." I marched toward the workers, waving my arms. "This is private property. That fence has been there for decades." One of the men paused and said, "She told us it was approved by the board." I pointed to the tree line behind him. "Does that look like HOA land to you? You're cutting into my lot. Stop right now before you end up part of a lawsuit." They backed off immediately, muttering apologies, and Karen turned red with rage. "You're obstructing infrastructure expansion," she snapped. "That's a finable offense." I laughed bitterly. "You've made up so many fines, you might as well start charging me for cloud coverage." She stormed off, muttering something about calling in a surveyor. I called my lawyer and gave him a play-by-play. That same day, another envelope arrived at my door. Inside was a document labeled Notice of Noncompliance Penalty, Stage 3. It claimed I owed the HOA $900 in accrued fines, including one for unauthorized birdhouses and another for excessive tree shade. According to Karen, my oak trees were creating seasonal emotional imbalance due to their shadow patterns. I scanned the document and emailed it to my lawyer with the subject line, "You're not going to believe this one." By now, the rest of the neighborhood had started to catch on. More and more residents began questioning Karen's authority. Some attended her meetings just to heckle her. One guy brought popcorn and sat in the front row, clapping sarcastically every time she brought up a new made-up ordinance. A Facebook group called The Real Bluff popped up, where neighbors posted memes of Karen standing next to signs like "No breathing without permit" and fines for smiling on Tuesdays. Her grip was loosening, but she didn't see it. She doubled down. Then came her ultimate move. Karen installed a small wooden gate at the top of my driveway. Not a rail gate, but a symbolic one, made of plywood and zip ties, painted with the words, "HOA Zone Entry, Residents Only." It was comically flimsy and clearly not permanent, but the message was clear. She was claiming my driveway. I stepped over it, tore it down, and leaned it against a tree with a note that read, "Nice try." She responded with a personal visit that afternoon, marching up to my porch with a clipboard and a self-important look. "You've now violated 6 community codes and damaged HOA property. This is your final warning." I stared at her, expressionless. "Karen, do you even hear yourself? You can't just build gates on someone else's land and call them property. You're losing your grip." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't about me. It's about the integrity of the community." I stepped forward, quietly. "No, Karen. It's about control. And you've lost it." Before she could respond, a pickup truck pulled up beside us. It was the county's land assessor. I had scheduled a formal boundary inspection. Karen immediately tried to charm him, offering him one of her brochures and pointing out the flags she'd planted like she was giving a real estate tour. He glanced at the map, then at my deed, then said, "Ma'am, none of your markers are on HOA property. In fact, some of them are 100 feet into this man's land. If anything, you're the one trespassing." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She tried to argue, but the assessor cut her off. "I've been doing this for 20 years. You can't argue with county lines." He handed me a copy of the updated boundary sketch and said, "Keep this on file. If she pushes again, give me a call." I thanked him and turned back to Karen, who stood there stunned. "This changes nothing," she muttered. "You're still a threat to the community spirit." As she stormed off, I folded the new map carefully and placed it inside the folder labeled Endgame. The battle wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. Karen had thrown everything at me: fake votes, forged maps, public shaming, but facts were stubborn things. And now I had them on my side. She could rant and rave and build all the cardboard gates she wanted. But from this point forward, every one of her moves was just another nail in her own administrative coffin. Karen's defeat at the hands of the county assessor might have stopped a rational person. But Karen wasn't driven by reason. She was driven by the intoxicating blend of ego, imagined power, and the belief that anything she said loudly enough would eventually become true. After the boundary assessment confirmed I was not part of the HOA and that her flags were actually trespassing, she disappeared for 2 days. No flyers, no HOA declarations, no dramatic accusations. Just silence. At first, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was finally accepting reality. But on the third morning, a loud knock echoed through the stillness of the woods like a drumbeat of doom. I opened my door and there she was, wearing what I can only describe as a militarized version of business casual. She had on a navy blazer, khaki slacks, and a fake earpiece that wasn't connected to anything. In her hands was a brand new clipboard and a rolled-up poster tube. "I am invoking Section 9 of Community Code Protocol," she announced. I blinked once. "That doesn't exist." She ignored me and continued. "This is a formal notification that you are now under provisional observation pending full compliance review. I've also notified the HOA's Legal Advisory Panel." I sighed. "You mean Greg? The retired dentist who lives on Lot 12 and once sued his own reflection during a sleepwalking episode?" Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she handed me a sheet of paper with the heading, Official Observation Schedule, which listed 12 different inspection times she had apparently assigned herself for my property over the next 3 weeks. I stepped outside and pointed at the edge of the tree line. "Karen, you see that boundary? That legal, county-certified line you tried to saw through last week? That line means you are not allowed to set foot beyond that point." She looked at me with a tight smile and said, "I've been advised that civil presence during observation doesn't count as trespassing." I asked, "By whom?" She didn't answer, just spun on her heel and walked away like she'd just won a courtroom drama. I called my lawyer and gave him the update. He told me to keep filming, keep documenting, and let her build the rope she was already wrapping around her own argument. The next escalation came 2 nights later. I was watching an old western on my porch when the motion sensor lights blinked on near the back gate. I grabbed my flashlight and quietly made my way around the side of the cabin. At first, I thought it might be a deer or raccoon. But as I got closer, I saw a figure crouched near the side window, holding a drill. Karen, in her HOA vest and tactical fanny pack, was trying to remove the lock on my storm shutter. I froze for a second, unsure whether to laugh or yell. But the sight of her fumbling with power tools while wearing a glow-in-the-dark HOA badge was just too bizarre. I flipped on the floodlight and called out, "You might want to put that down before you add burglary to your resume." She dropped the drill with a squeal and scrambled backward. "I was inspecting. That's not illegal." I held up my phone, already recording.